It was a quiet night. The sun was beginning to set behind the hills, casting a warm orange light over our serene neighborhood. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, while the soft murmur of the radio played in the background. My son Mateo had just returned home from college for the weekend. There was a comforting, calm energy in the house. That kind of peace you feel when everything is familiar. Mateo had grown up so fast it seemed like yesterday when he was a little boy following me around the house, asking endless questions about life. Now, at 19, he was no longer the little boy I remembered, but a strong young man who was self-assured and sometimes unknowingly distant. The relationship between us had changed as he matured, and I was still getting used to it. Dinner was ready, and I called him from the living room. As we sat at the table, I noticed the way he looked at me differently. Intense in a way that made me pause. At first, I dismissed it, thinking it was my imagination. We talked about his classes, his friends, and how much he missed home. But the way he talked and how his eyes lingered longer than usual, looking into mine, made me feel something I didn't know how to describe. After dinner, we decided to watch a movie together, something we used to do all the time before he left for college. The living room felt cozier than usual, the dim lighting and soft cushions creating the perfect ambience for a quiet evening. I couldn't remember the last time we had had such a peaceful evening together. As the movie continued, I caught myself watching him more than I should have, noticing how he had changed. He was no longer the boy I had raised, but a man. And just as I was beginning to feel a strange discomfort from the thoughts that were crossing my mind, he moved closer to me on the couch. At first I thought it was something innocent, but then his hand brushed mine, and I felt a spark run through me. Something electric, something I knew I shouldn't feel. I quickly pulled my hand away, surprised by the intensity of the moment. "What's wrong, Mom?" I asked in a soft, almost worried voice. I looked at him. My heart went out to her quickly, not knowing what to say. "Nothing, honey. I'm just tired," I replied, trying to downplay the feeling and hoping she wouldn't notice the attention between us. But I knew something had changed in that instant, something we couldn't ignore. The line between mother and son had blurred, and although neither of us had crossed it, the air was charged with unspoken thoughts. The movie went on, but neither of us was paying attention. I got up telling him I was going to bed early, but as I drifted off, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between us. That night, I trimmed myself in bed. My mind wouldn't stop racing. I knew I couldn't let this feeling grow. I had to stay away for both our sakes, but deep down, I wasn't sure how to do that. The next morning, I woke up feeling restless. The events of the night before kept replaying in my mind. I tried to shake off the feeling by convincing myself that it had all been my invention. I was his mother, nothing more, nothing less. I loved him deeply, but not in a way that could be misinterpreted. I was acting irrationally, I told myself. Mateo was already awake when I came downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He greeted me with a smile, as if nothing had happened. Maybe it really was nothing, just a strange moment that only I had noticed. I decided to put it out of my mind, at least for now. "Good morning," I said, forcing a smile and trying to sound as normal as possible. "Good morning, Mom," he replied, his voice calm and relaxed. "I was thinking of going for a walk later. Do you want to join me?" A walk. It had been so long since we had done something like that together. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should spend more time alone with him after what I felt the night before. But then I reminded myself that it was just a mother and her son spending time together. There was nothing wrong with that. "Sure," I said. "Sounds good." Later that afternoon, we drove to a nearby trailhead, or a place we had been to many times when I was younger. The air was cool. The sky was bright blue, and for a moment everything felt normal. We walked side by side, talking about nothing in particular. Old memories, his plans for the future, the usual chatter. I found myself laughing, feeling more at ease with him, thinking that maybe I had overreacted the night before. But as we walked further down the trail, there were times when our conversation stopped, leaving a silence that felt heavier than it should. At one point, as we reached Con Claro with a beautiful view of the valley below, Mateo stopped walking and turned to me. "You've always been there for my mom," he said, softly but earnestly. "I don't know what I would do without you." I don't know what I would do without you. There was something in the way he said it that surprised me. a vulnerability in his tone that made my heart ache. I smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, you won't have to worry about that for a long time." I joked, "I'm not leaving." He didn't laugh. Instead, he took a step closer, his eyes locked on mine. "No, I mean it," he continued. "She's always been more than just my mom. She's been everything." I froze. The words floated in the air, heavy and full of meaning. I wasn't ready to face him. I searched his face for some sign that he was just being sentimental, that this was just an innocent moment of affection. But there was something in his eyes, something that made my heart pound, just like the night before. "Matteo," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You know how much I love you, don't you?" "Of course," he replied, leaning even closer. "I love you too, more than you can imagine." My pulse quickened. This was not how a mother and child should talk to each other, or how they should look at each other. My mind was screaming at me to walk away, to put distance between the two of us, but my body was frozen in place. "I think we should go back," I said, my voice trembling. "It's too late now," but before I could turn around, he reached out and gently took my hand. The touch was innocent enough, but the way he held it as his thumb slowly brushed my skin made my stomach twist in a way I couldn't ignore. "Mom," softly said, her voice filled with something I couldn't identify. "I don't know how to say this, but I've been feeling something I shouldn't be. And I think you've been feeling it too." Panic swept through me. I withdrew my hand quickly, stepping back, my heart clutching it tightly. "Matteo, stop it," I said, my voice shaking. "You don't mean it. You're confused." He looked at me. His expression was a mixture of confusion and pain. "I'm not confused, Mom. I know how I feel." "No," I said, shaking my head. "This is not right. You're my son. We can." I couldn't finish the sentence. The words felt too dangerous, too heavy to say out loud. Matteo took a deep breath, his face clouding over with emotion. I know, it's not right, but I can't help how I feel, and I don't think you can either." Tears welled in my eyes as I struggled to keep my composure. This wasn't happening, this couldn't be happening. I had to stop it before it went any further, before we crossed a line we couldn't unravel. "I'm your mother," I said, my voice cracking. "And I love you. But not like that. We can't." The words hung between us, thick and suffocating. I saw the pain in her eyes, how her shoulders sagged in defeat. He nodded slowly, looking down at the floor as if he were ashamed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." I swallowed hard, trying to control the overwhelming mix of emotions that were welling up inside of me. "It's I said softly, though I wasn't sure if I really was. "Let's go home." The ride back was suffocatingly silent. Matthew didn't say a word, and neither did I. The weight of what had been said on the trail floated heavily between us, making each passing second feel endless. I kept my eyes on the road, my mind racing as I tried to process what had just happened. I couldn't believe the words that had come out of his mouth, the feelings he had confessed. It was as if everything I thought I knew about our relationship had been completely flipped upside down. When we finally reached the entrance, Matteo muttered something about going to his room. I didn't stop him as he walked up the stairs. I plopped down on the couch, my body shaking with the emotions I had been repressing since that moment on the trail. I didn't know how to understand all of this. He was my son, my little boy, but he was no longer a child, and it was becoming frighteningly clear to me that our relationship had taken on a complexity that neither of us had anticipated. I wanted to believe that his feelings were just a phase, a passing thing that would go away in time. But the way he looked at me, how his hand lingered in mine, told me otherwise. A part of me felt guilty, as if maybe I had done something wrong. Maybe I had been too affectionate, too close all these years. But that wasn't right, was it? Mothers should love their children, care for them, be there for them. That was all she had done. But now, everything felt clouded by the strange tension that had grown between us, and I didn't know how to fix it. I spent the rest of the day avoiding it, keeping busy with chores and anything that might distract me from the turmoil I felt. By the time evening came, I was emotionally drained. I didn't want to face what had happened, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. Matthew and I couldn't go on like this, pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. That night, after I had spent hours tossing and turning in bed, I heard a knock at the door. My heart sank. I knew it was him. "Mom, can I come in?" His voice was soft, almost hesitant. I hesitated, my mind screaming at me to say no, to put distance between us, but I knew I could no longer avoid him. I had to face this, uncomfortable as it was. "Come in," I said softly, sitting up in bed and covering myself with the sheets, as if they could protect me from the emotional storm that was about to rage. Matteo came in looking as conflicted and uncertain as I felt. He stood at the threshold of the room for a moment, not knowing what to do. And then, after a few seconds, he sat on the edge of the bed, but kept his distance. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I shouldn't have said what I said before." I don't know what came over me. I nodded slowly, trying to find the right words. "I know this is confusing," I said, "but what happened before can't happen again, Matteo. We have to be careful. This is not how things should be." "I know," he whispered, looking at the floor, "but it's so hard, Mom. I don't know why I feel this way. I've tried to push it away, but it keeps coming back." His words hit me deeply. I felt an overwhelming sadness for him, for both of us, actually. This was not a situation I had ever imagined living in, but here we were caught in a web of emotions that neither of us knew how to untangle. "I am your mother," I said again, with a soft but firm sigh. "That's all I can be. You know that, don't you?" She looked at me, her eyes full of pain, but she nodded. "I know," he said, "but I don't want to lose you." "You're not going to lose me," I assured him. "But we have to set boundaries, Matteo. This is dangerous ground." There was a moment of silence between us. The tension from the previous evening was still in the air, but there was also an unspoken understanding that things could not go on as they were. We both knew it, though neither of us wanted to fully acknowledge it. "Maybe it would be best if you went back to school tomorrow," I suggested gently. "I think we both need some space to clear our heads." Matteo nodded slowly, though I could see the sadness in his eyes. "Yes," he said softly, "maybe he's right." The next morning, I watched as he packed his things. The air between us was thick with unresolved emotions. I wanted to hug him, to tell him everything would be okay, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not after everything that had happened. When he finally left, the house felt emptier than it had in years. I sat on the couch looking out the window, trying to process everything. I knew we had both made the right decision by putting some distance between us. But that didn't make it any easier. The relationship between mother and son was supposed to be simple and pure, but ours had become something much more complicated. Something neither of us knew how to handle. As the days passed, I tried to get back to my routine, but it wasn't the same. The house was too quiet without Matthew, and I found myself thinking about him more than I should have. I wanted to believe that distance would help, that it would give us the space we both needed to sort out our feelings. But deep down, I knew things would never go back to the way they were. Something had changed between us, something we couldn't undo, and I wasn't sure what was separating us going forward. Thank you for listening to my stories. Before I say goodbye, I invite you to subscribe to my channel and turn on the little bell so you don't miss my next stories.